ridiculous fondling cardboard.
Well, Matt, welcome. How you doing?
Doing great, Mike. Yeah, thanks for having me here. What a joy.
You bet. I was really excited to talk to you for a bunch of reasons. We've had some really good conversations offline, but I really look forward to talking about running cards, golf cards. There could be some, maybe spiritual stuff we get into. But first, why don't you kick things off with, walk us through your early collecting days, how your tastes and priorities in collecting have evolved over time. What's your general background?
Yeah, Mike, you're gracious to have me on. I feel like I am probably the least knowledgeable as far as golf stuff goes, but yeah, I love cards and excited to share. So I grew up product of the 90s as a baseball card guy, and so I grew up collecting, what the baseball card guys call as junk wax. I remember convincing one of my buddies to sell all of his Pokemon cards, which probably are worth a lot of money now, so that we could even buy more and more, 90s junk wax. I know there's several folks out here who have a similar story to me, but during COVID, I was at home trying to figure out what was going on, and it was late one night, and I just had this epiphany of, oh man, where are my baseball cards? And so I ended up going through those probably from about 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. that evening. Just was overwhelmed by just how awesome the nostalgia was and wanted to find a way back into the hobby. Remember that I enjoyed it, but just didn't know how, and would kind of followed it on the sidelines. And then I ended up seeing on, I think it was on Reddit or something else like that, I saw a picture of a old vintage tobacco card from the T206 set, the baseball set, and just was, my doors were blown off. I thought, man, I've never seen anything that looked like this. This is amazing. So then I started learning about it, learning about the history behind it, and just really captivated me, which launched me into collecting. And so joined some vintage baseball and pre-war card forums and started getting more involved with the community, and have been at it ever since. And since then, my horizons have expanded way more than I ever would have imagined, starting off just, baseball to going, into track and field stuff, dabbling in the golf world as well. But it's been such a fun ride though the last, 3 or 4 years.
Awesome. The 90s is a brutal time looking back because you have fond memories, but we all kick ourselves. With me, it was, instead of baseball, it was hockey, of course, being in Canada. And but I know I'm familiar with all the other sports. So for baseball, basketball, football, you look back and say, why wasn't I collecting the 97 precious metal gems and star rubies and the stuff that have gone up like 1,000-fold?
That's
Um,
right.
but and it's not necessarily about the money, but it's about the attainability because nowadays we're not going to spend that kind of money per se. Um, and it's funny you say Pokemon because I was huge into Pokemon in the 90s. Like when it
Mm.
first came out, I was walking through the hallways at school and saw like older kids opening packs and trading and stuff. I was just awestruck. I thought those things are so cool. So luckily, I didn't end up selling all my Pokemon back then. And it's part of those have actually been able to fund my collecting journey.
Oh man, you're a better man than I am, man. That's awesome.
Like actually, it was 2019, just before the COVID pandemic. I was trying to buy a truck. I needed to save up some money. I went into my closet and I looked at all my cards. And I thought, oh, it was breaking my heart to think about selling some of them. And I couldn't touch my sports card boxes. I did dive into some of the Pokemon stuff. I started selling some cards. A friend of mine hit me up on Facebook because he saw me post some cards on a group. And he said, "You collect cards? No way. I'll be over at your place tomorrow." And he like brought his box of cards, and
Oh, that's amazing.
his enthusiasm just like sucked me right back into the world. Okay, so you started in the 90s, you collected baseball, and then you mentioned track and field. So what inspired you, I guess, to pursue running? Because you were a pretty elite runner, I believe. How did you end up pursuing that path, and how did that shape who you are today?
So I really have to go all the way back in my story. So I'm actually a triplet, believe it or not. I was the big one. I was 2.5 pounds. My sisters were two
Whoa.
pounds, and we weren't supposed to make it. But just by a miracle, we did. And with the territory of being a triplet and just being on the smaller side, as we got closer into middle school and everyone played sports, but in Texas, football is king. And so I had signed up to play football. The first day of practice, the coach that had been there for like 40 years grabbed me and said, "Son, in my 40 years of coaching, I've never had anyone that wore an extra small sized football helmet, and you would be the first."
Wow.
So I thought, oh, great. And he said, you could play football for me and you'd be okay. But if you were my son, I'd make you run cross country. The only problem was the cross country team didn't exist at the middle school I was at. And so it was there and then I started the cross country team there. And so I was a one man team for about 3 years. Was super grateful for a lot of great encouragement and some amazing coaches along the way. And pretty early on, I knew, even in middle school, I was like, hey, this is something that I can keep pursuing, and, wanted to do it in college. And just thankfully, the Lord gave me that passion to keep going. And so running college, there wasn't another option. I always wanted to run in college. And then as far as inspiration goes, man, my favorite movie is Chariots of Fire. I would watch Chariots of Fire before races and just be inspired by some really amazing runners and just their story of faith and determination. And, that kept me going. I was humbled to get the chance to run in college for Baylor in Waco, Texas. It was amazing. Had a great experience. I was injured most of my career, but I still had that fire, and it was such a blessing to be able to do that for 5 years. And then after school ended, I still had that fire because had been hurt for so many years. I said, hey, I want to keep this up. And so was lucky enough, just by the skin of my teeth, some coaches were let me on to a post-collegiate team for a few years. So I got to keep running at a competitive level, even after school, for a few years. And then, I was focused on the Olympic trials in 2020. That was one of my goals. It coincided kind of with the birth of my firstborn, and just had to make the decision that that my family was worth more than my running career, and hung the shoes up competitively and haven't looked back. And I think that was part of the segue that led me into cards. Was really, now that I'm, spent so much of my life pouring into my running, what are some ways that I can, hobbies or things I could do, as just like running was such a great escape for me and great sense of community for me. I loved it and wanted to find another avenue that had some of those same things. And it ended up card collecting was a great spot to turn to.
Cool. You mentioned Chariots of Fire, and I really wanted to learn more about that. But before we get there, I want to focus in a little more on running because, I was a runner as well. I wasn't a triplet. Surprise, surprise. I was born in January, so I was one of the older kids in my class, and I know my family, we mature faster than a lot of our peers. So through elementary school and, middle school ages, I was always just way bigger, stronger, faster than everybody else. I enjoyed running. I enjoyed every sport basically. Then once I got into high school, I did run still. I was a better runner than I was in other sports, but I just loved basketball. I played rugby. As the years went on, everybody caught up and just surpassed me. By the time I was a senior playing basketball, I was the second or third shortest person on the team. I can relate a lot to what you said about injuries and maybe feeling like there's something left untapped. Because when I played other sports, I got injured. I got beat up pretty good in rugby, quit that pretty quickly, but I kept on with basketball. And so I had all kinds of knee and ankle injuries. In my senior year of cross country, for instance, I had to sit out for a few weeks. And as well as anyone, that high school cross country season is not too long. So that really kind of held me back. I felt like there's some unfinished business with running.
Absolutely.
And the other aspect is, there's a coach who I absolutely loved. He was very, as a lot of runners are, very quirky and and like I don't know if this was his policy as a teacher or if it was him, just his comfort level, but he didn't want to like give hugs or anything, even in like the most special moments. And I remember my last race, provincial championships, he gave me a hug, and it like the endorphins blew up, and then our whole team all came into a big group hug. Everyone was crying. It was like the most intense kind of emotion. And even though I didn't get the results that I wanted, it pushed me into trying to run. So at UBC, I was a walk-on in my freshman year, and I was a duster. It was a pretty elite team for Canada, a couple of Olympians on the team. So,
oh, wow.
So, over the course of the first couple months, I realized pretty quickly, man, I'm gonna have to put in a lot of work to keep up with, even the worst of the traveling team. So, and combining that with studying mechanical engineering, and then lingering injuries, looking back, wishing I did physio and stuff more, kind of fizzled out, let's say. Fast forward 10 years, my coach passed away. He was struggling with a rare disease. He wasn't that old. And a friend of mine and I were messaging and said, let's go out for a run in his honor. And I had gained like 30 pounds. I injured myself instantly because you go for
Oh,
one,
yeah, that
you go
makes
for,
sense.
you go for one run and you're like, whoa, that felt so good. You forget your body isn't the same as it was before. And yeah, I ended up over 9 months losing, I think about 25 pounds or so. And I ended up running a marathon, kind of going from couch to marathon. And yeah, that. So I went a bit off the tracks there, but I just
No,
wanted to kind of share my running journey as well.
yeah, that's super impressive. Our stories definitely have some similarities, and I showed up. I was a good runner. I would not call myself a elite runner in high school. As far as recruiting and all that goes. But when I showed up to Baylor, I was out of the five freshmen that showed up, or the six freshmen that showed up, I was number five on the roster as far as talent goes. And so, I remember telling myself, I was like, hey, like, no matter what happens, no matter how talented I am or the results, the one thing that I know that I'm going to hang my hat on is that I'm going to outwork every single person on this team. It was interesting to see how that played out because four of those six guys that we came in with ended up leaving the team and getting burned out. But it ended up being just myself and another guy that stuck it out for the 4 or 5 years, and grateful that I did. I would make that decision 100 times again if I had the choice. But yeah, it's a hard sport to stay committed to. It's relentless knowing that my story being injured 3.5 out of the 5 years when I was there, I remember even my dad asked me, he's like, hey, why are you still doing this? But I had felt, a calling to stay committed to the team. And, I really had to teach myself that, like, hey, man, my identity and my worth isn't into my performance. It's, I can be, just as impactful, on the sidelines, encouraging my teammates than I am, racing in a jersey. So that was a really big epiphany to me, that I had to reteach myself and relearn that lesson several times. But it was super meaningful to me, and loved just being a part of that team and camaraderie that came with running. So definitely something that I look back now and I'm like, man, it'd be fun to have a team like that. I think at work, I still have a little bit of that team, but nothing replaces some of those amazing memories you had in high school or in college.
Yeah, you're right. I don't think any work or career quite emulates what you get out of being part of sports or a sports team. It's totally different. But you know what? I'm impressed with your ability to stick through it. I would like to think I had that level of determination, but I obviously didn't. I chose my academic focus instead, and I have a feeling you managed to balance it all pretty well. So. But when it comes to being inspired, when it comes to these movies and stories that people like to follow, it's never the person who's the most athletically gifted that people, are drawn towards if they don't put in that same effort, if they don't commit the same way. I think it's the underdog who commits and goes all in, and those are the stories you can learn from and that get me fired up. So speaking of that, I'm gonna shift over, I guess, to sort of like Cards, but it's actually a movie, and that's the Chariots of Fire. So this is related to Cards, but before we talk about the Cards, what is Chariots of Fire? Because I've never seen or heard of it until you and I were talking.
Yeah, there's probably only about five people in the world that still say that they are fans of Chariots of Fire, and I'm one of them. So yeah, it was a movie in the I think it was it's a little embarrassing. I don't know the exact date. If I were to make it up, I'd say I think 82 or 84 that was made, and it was a movie focused around really two guys in the 1924 Paris Olympics. So it's actually pretty cool that they had the 2024 Paris Olympics, which marked the 100-year anniversary of the Paris Olympics. So really special year for me, just thinking about that this year. So it was really fun, especially watching Scotty Scheffler get his gold medal at the Olympics. But no, so Chariots of Fire, it focuses on two guys and really contrasts the way they go about training and competing and striving for the gold medal. There's this guy, Eric Little, who's this Scottish runner who's really focused on, running with heart, running with grit and determination, and is really focused on his faith. And that's, the biggest priority in his life. There's scenes in the movie where he questions on whether he should, run in the Olympics or focus on his missionary work in China, where he actually was born. And then you have that contrasted with this amazing Jewish athlete, Harold Abrahams, and they were both sprinters. And Harold is this just incredible athlete who really is the quintessential, I am just going to outwork everyone no matter what it takes. I'm going to sacrifice 24/7 of my time to become the ultimate athlete. I'm going to put every bit of my ounce and worth into this effort. And so it's interesting as the movie really contrasts the two. And what ends up happening is Eric and Harold are both 100-meter runners, sprinters, but and this is a true story, which just really gets me going. But what happens is that, and this is predetermined beforehand, the movie doesn't portray this correctly, but the 100-meter final heats weren't, they fell on a Sunday. And so Eric actually, through his faith and conviction, one of his convictions was that he wasn't going to compete on a Sunday because he wanted to honor the Sabbath and his faith. And so he says, hey, I'm not going to run, even though it's my dream to, win an Olympic gold medal. I'm going to sacrifice my dream of being an Olympic gold medalist, and I'm not going to run the 100-meter race. And so one of his teammates, Lord Lindsay, aka his real name is Lord Burley, ends up letting him run his 400-meter race instead for him because he had already competed in the steeplechase. And so Eric ends up switching over from the 100 to the 400, which, Mike, as a runner, I know you can attest to. That would be a really hard change, but Eric ended up winning the gold medal in the 400. Harold Abrahams actually wins the gold medal in the 100, and wow. everyone celebrates. But it's just a remarkable story, following Eric in his journey of faith that always inspired me. And then, I'm also inspired by Harold as well as some of the other guys that they show in that movie. So I used to always watch that every night before I raced. That was my kind of pre-race ritual. I'd watch Chariots of Fire, which a lot of people would say is a super long and slow movie, but for me, there's just some amazing scenes where Eric talks about what he calls running the straight race. And to me, just watching even that scene, or a scene where he talks about Isaiah 40 in the Bible, it just really inspires me and motivated me before I laced up my own shoes, and kind of gave me the right mindset heading into the race. Most importantly for me is I wanted to, go out there and compete with the mindset of, hey, I want to glorify God in the way I run. And, I'm not doing this for myself. And so it was always a great movie to be inspired by.
Growing up, I always thought of running as like a pure athletic event. Whoever was the fastest was going to win. But as you start running middle and longer distances, you realize it's very much a mental game, way more than people give it credit for. But for basketball, I also had a movie that I would watch before basketball games. Not nearly as admirable as your movie, but I would watch 300.
Oh, yes.
And
That's
I
a
would
classic.
get fired up, just the pure raw, strength and the underdogs that just put up the biggest fight they could, even though they all got crushed in the end. And it's funny because as we approached our provincial tournaments, basically like playing in states in the US, kind of came middle of the pack. But it was that kind of 300 mentality that I showed up with every warm up every day. So running, like there's a lot of different directions I want to take this, but since this is sort of a sports cards focused podcast, Chariots of Fire has some cards. Am I correct? Or are they cards from different sets that you combine to make each of the athletes from the movie? Like, can you tell us how that movie is connected to cards?
Yeah, as a baseball guy, I didn't even know that, track and field cards existed. But I I was thinking to myself one day, I was like, man, as I got kind of more into just the memorabilia and this world, I thought, it'd be really cool to own something that's related to Chariots of Fire. And I was like, wait a second, I should just look up and see, if any of these guys, there's kind of four guys that the movie features. I mentioned two of them. Those are kind of the main two characters, but then there's also two other characters. A guy named Lord Burleigh, also in the movie, they call him Lord Lindsay, and then another guy, Aubrey Montague. And so as I thought about it, I was like, man, it would be so fun to get, it would start as a very simple project. I said, okay, I want to get a playing card from each one of those characters. And so again, seems pretty simple. But as I looked into it, I realized I don't think this is possible. And so, there's two cards that I knew that were very, they're from many, many sets. So and I'll show you a few of them here, but the Lord Burleigh and then the Harold Abrahams are all over in different cards. So, I'll show you there's some Harold Abrahams from the 1936 sporting personalities. I love the 1929 sporting champions set. Here is the Lord Burleigh from that. What I also love is that Harold Abrahams is in that as well. So those were two of the first cards that I purchased, is those 1929 Geoffrey Phillips sets. So I nailed the two of the four, and I was like, okay, we're doing pretty good. But there was two other cards that I just didn't think existed. I didn't think there was an EA Montague card, and I didn't think Eric Little existed, because I would go on, I don't know if you use trading card database, but I went and searched their names and did all that and did all the searching I could find, and nothing showed up. And so as I was going through and looking up Montague, who's one of the four, I ended up on a very obscure, like, I think the website looked like it was made right when the internet was created, but super hard to navigate, like grainy photos. But I found a European dealer that had a EA Montague card from a very obscure set called the 1922 Bunsen Confectionery. And it's actually a huge set. I had no idea. It has like 700 cards they're all cricket players and English football players. But then somewhere hiding in that set there was a EA Montague, which his initials, Evelyn Aubrey Montague. And so found the card and just was like almost overwhelmed that it even existed. And way overpaid for the card. But I was like, I'll do whatever it takes. This might be the only one that I know of. There's not a single one graded from any of the companies. So honestly, it was one of my favorite pickups from, I think it was January of this year. And then that led to, the final card, my hero, Eric Little. And I thought, I think the journey's over, but it ends up, what's so funny is I was searching for it, and I ended up looking at the website pre-war cards, and I found this set I think it's the 1924 British Champion set, which actually has some golfers in it as well, which is kind of a fun crossover there. But there is an Eric Little card, which I'm going to send off to SGC here shortly, actually this weekend at the Dallas show. But the funniest thing is they actually spelled his name wrong, which is why I never could find it in the trading card database. So it's spelled little Liddle and not ELL. So I found the card, but I didn't know how to get it because I looked at it and it was like an expensive card. Didn't want to like fork up my life savings to get this one card I couldn't find, but ended up throwing out a prayer on a Net 54, which is a pre-war baseball card forum, and found a guy, a Canadian of all people, Mike, your fellow Canadian brethren, he's a chess and billiards guy, which is of all things super random, but he had the Abrahams of the set as well as the little, and gave me those two cards for a fraction of what they go for, just out of the kindness of his heart, because I explained to him what I was doing. And so, anyways, so that's the long tail of how I completed kind of my initial pass through of what I call the Chariots of Fire set. Along the way, as projects just get deeper and deeper the more you go into them. So, now there's a few more obscure cards that I'm like, oh, that would be, fun to go after. I think the other kind of long casting goal would be to actually find an autograph of each one of those four. And I want to say it was really a birthday present to myself, but I found it's another one of those, crazy European finds, but I found a British dealer that had a Harold Abrahams autograph. And I was able to grab that. I was thinking about taking that to Beckett this weekend to get that authenticated. Yeah, I'm not 100% on it. I'm not going to lie, but it wasn't a crazy price, and for me, it was definitely worth the gamble. So we'll see if it pays off here in a few weeks, but definitely a fun pickup. And yeah, this whole journey's been really really fun, because I think for me it's less about the cards and more, I mean, the journey's been fun, but it's more of like, man, when I look at these cards, I'm reminded of the stories that I see in Chariots of Fire. I'm reminded of Eric Little and Harold Abrams, or a scene in Chariots of Fire where, Montague's leaping over a steeplechase while they talk about Isaiah 40 and talking about, running and trusting in God when you're weary. And so, these kind of things bring me so much joy, because it goes really beyond the cards are amazing. I love the cards, but I love the fact that these cards remind me of some truth, and remind me of a lot of great character and value behind them.
Wow. There's so much there, Matt, that I want to unpack. The first thing, very surface level. Here in Canada, it's so cold most of the year that we have nothing better to do than hole up in our houses and collect cards. So that's why you're the Canadian guy who collects chess and billiards, uh, is not a surprise to me. And it's funny, if you talk to him about running or golf cards, he'd probably think that we're pretty weird, and that chess and billiards makes a lot more sense. But at the end of the day, it's whatever inspires you, right? Um, so okay, spelling the name wrong. That was curious. So was that E.A. Montague?
So Montague's name was actually spelled correctly. He just had his initials instead of his name. So
mm,
it made it a little bit more hard to find. But what it was the actually kind of the guy that I wanted the most, Eric Little, was the hardest one to find.
mm,
His name was spelled Little, spelled Liddle, which is incorrect. It should have been Liddell. And
mm,
so honestly, I was shocked that I ended up stumbling across it just from, and actually similar to the Montague card, his first initials are also abbreviated on the card. It actually says E.H. Little. So similarly to the Montague card, also abbreviated. I don't know if you've ever run up into any golf cards that were that way, that made it trickier to find, but that was definitely didn't make it easy on anyone. And I wish
mm.
in 1924 they had, thought to get that spelling done correctly. Would have saved 100 years later, would have saved me a lot of pain and heartache.
The only golfer that really comes to mind, Bobby Jones. I think his card says Robert T. Jones or something like that. And
Okay. Yeah.
of course, that was probably his legal name, and so it makes sense that that was on the card. Anybody who posts his cards on eBay, they would put Bobby either in quotes, or they would say Robert T. Jones and then they would write Bobby afterwards, just to make sure that anybody who's searching for Bobby Jones cards, that
Right.
it does pop up. Maybe little and running cards are a little more obscure, so the person doesn't think to both write the incorrect and the correct spelling, or
Right.
perhaps most people just didn't even know. I'm fascinated by your interest in such an obscure set and this movie. As you said, there's probably only 5 people in the world who would say they like that movie. I'm sure it's more than that. If it's as inspiring as you described, I'll definitely be checking it out someday soon.
Their soundtrack, I'm underplaying it, but they have one of the most epic soundtracks of all time. I'm pretty sure that it won. Vangelis wrote the soundtrack, and they won all these awards for the soundtrack. So most people, if you were to say Chariots of Fire, they could start to hum the introductory theme song, where it's a great scene. It's actually my background here on my computer, where the runners are running on the beach at St. Andrews, of all places. They're running on the beach at St. Andrews, and this epic, music goes off, and you can just see them, splashing up water. So really cool scene, in an amazing location as well. So
Wow,
really,
yeah,
really fun.
that would definitely resonate with the golf fans listening to this episode. By the way, so if there's people who want to get a wider net when you're searching for cards, whether it's on eBay, simple Google search, or any of these awesome websites that Matt has been referencing, uh, a trick that I like to do is you can save searches not just for the properly spelled name, but you can do common misspellings. Like uh, if somebody's name is Matthew, you might spell it both with one T and with two T's. One of the guys I collect is Matthew Wolf, so I started doing that pretty early on. In eBay, when you actually, the way you can capture that in a single search is by putting brackets and then separating the two variations with a comma. So you'd write Matthew with two T's, comma, Matthew with one T, brackets around all that, and then it will come up with any listings with both of those spellings. And you could do, Conor McGregor, for instance. I used to be more into UFC than I am now, but I still enjoy it from time to time. And I would spell Connor in like 3 or 4 different ways, and
Right.
I'd make sure that because it turns out he was a commonly misspelled name. So here's a question: when you found out that they had misspelled his name on the card, did a bunch of copies of the card suddenly pop up once you were searching for the way the card was actually spelled? Like, now that you know how it's misspelled, is there one or two of them that pop up from time to time on eBay?
So yeah, I really appreciate the heads up on the safe searches, because I actually get emails for two different safe searches, one spelled the correct way and one spelled the way the card is. And so I appreciate the heads up, Mike. But yeah, so when I figured out how the card was actually spelled, um, there was one available. It was already graded by PSA. I think it was a PSA 4 or 5, and you know, obviously the guy knew what he had, because you could kind of ballpark what the value should be, but the I think raw the card is like a probably like $150 card, but he had a graded copy, and I think it was on there for $600. So I was like, hey, so that gave me the feeling of, hey, worst case, I'm out $600, but you know, I think we can do better than that. So that was where I was wanting to be patient, and because I didn't know much about the cards, at that point wanted to just feel it out and slowly look for it, and grateful that my shot in the dark, thanks to my Canadian friend Nick, he came through in the clutch for me. So yeah, it will be really fun. The Dallas card shows this weekend. I'm gonna make a short appearance on Friday, and I've got, I think, about 15 cards, and a lot of those are track and field cards that'll go to SGC for grading. So I'm excited about that. So I've held this Little and Abraham cards and Montague and a few others, all collectively for over a year now, and I'm excited to kind of all send them in and get them encapsulated. So it'll be fun.
Awesome. Awesome. Uh, it's tricky when it's such a rare card and you can't necessarily find comps. You look at it and you think, well, how much does this card mean to me? Like, what would I value this card at? $100, $600, what is it? And that's so, the seller certainly has an advantage over you. And the story that pops into my mind is, and it actually involves another 80s movie. I was a big fan of the Blues Brothers. I just thought it was such a silly movie. It was
Yeah.
probably when I watched it, I was probably younger than I should have been, and it just kind of blew my mind. And we ended up naming our youngest son Elwood, and he's of course one of the Blues Brothers. And my wife would say we didn't name him after a blues brother, but that's one of the reasons I enjoy
Yeah.
the name anyways.
It's
And
awesome.
I was sitting there and he was only a couple months old and I'm changing his diaper and I was thinking about him and I was thinking about his name and the positive associations I had with the name Elwood. And it popped in my mind, does Elwood Blues have a card? Like if he does,
Yeah.
I need it. So I instantly am like I finished up the diaper and I went and sat in a chair and snuggled my little guy and pulled up my phone. I just did a quick search for Elwood and Blues Brothers and trading card and all that on eBay. And there was one card. And I also did a search for sold listings because, of course,
Right.
if there's only one copy available, it makes me nervous because I don't have any other options. And it was around $500. So similar story as what you went through. And the sold listings were anywhere from like 70 to 150, something like that. And so I ended up sending the guy a message and I said, hey, I'm going to open the kimono, be transparent with you. I really want this card. Here's the reason why, and I wouldn't be selling it. Like it'd just be for my personal collection and
Right.
without getting too sappy and sentimental about it.
Hey, why
And
not?
the guy was totally accommodating and I forget what I offered, but it was, not near $500 or $600 and he accepted. And I I was excited. It was a graded copy. I forget if it's a PSA 6 or a PSA 4, but whatever it is, it's an awesome looking card. And then, fast forward 2 months later, I ended up setting a save search just in case anything else popped up. And it was from a set called Telepop. I forget if it's 82 or 84 or something like that. And a listing popped up for this entire magazine. These Telepop cards they're called stickers, but they don't actually have like a sticky surface like what us in North America would call a sticker.
Right.
So in Europe, they would actually like glue the back of the card and stick it into the magazine. And so
Oh, interesting.
they called those stickers. And so a complete set of the Telepop cards, including the Blues Brothers, popped up at auction. And so I threw a bid in there. I won it for $30. It was shipping from France. The set was printed in Italy. So now I've got two copies. One of them is, you
Oh,
know,
that's awesome.
glued into a magazine. The other one's graded. Um, so I don't know where I was going with that, but it just really kind of reminded me that, if something pops up, even if you think you're overpaying, I say go for it because I still own that card. I'm sure you're going to own that card for a while.
Oh yeah,
And
I don't ever imagine it's not for sale, and it won't. I can't imagine it would ever be for sale. It's probably those are some of those special cards that those will be passed down to I've got two boys, and I'd love for them to get into collecting, and I can almost almost guarantee you that those will be passed down when I pass because we are I heard it from someone else, but I feel I thought it was really good of, just viewing cards. It's like, man, we are just curators. We're not the long-term holders of these cards. And so, as the curator of the little and a few others, I'd love to hand down the curator position to my sons one day.
I can definitely relate. Our oldest, he's 3 years old, and he's got a little Pokemon lunchbox kind of thing, and he keeps his
Oh,
cards in there.
nice.
He has a bunch of hockey cards in there, but the proudest moment for me was when he said, Daddy, I want a shiny Tiger Woods card where he's wearing red." And I'm like, oh, right in the heart. Of course I'll get you a shiny
Yes.
Tiger Woods card.
Your son has a good taste, man. That's yeah, he picked the good stuff.
At least he didn't ask for a Tiger Woods autograph.
That's
Anyway,
right.
one day he'll get one of those, but as a toddler, I don't trust it in that little lunchbox. So there's a couple of things that you were talking about that I wanted to jump into. So one of them was about websites that you were using. A website that popped up when I was initially trying to do research on golf cards was this grainy, as just like what you said, the first website ever made about Ben Hogan cards, and it was this Ben Hogan collector, and he had all the research that you can imagine in there, like a list of all of his cards, which ones this collector owned, which ones he was missing. He was kind of, and then I kind of connected the dots because there was a guy in our Facebook group, Golf Cards and Memorabilia, that would periodically post saying, "Hey, I'm looking for these particular Van Hogan cards." So I reached out to him and said, "Hey, is this your website?" And he said, "Yeah, yeah."
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And
Makes
and
sense.
so sometimes the most obscure, seemingly unreliable websites can have the deepest information. Um, so you mentioned TCDB, you mentioned what was that baseball one?
Yeah, Net 54 has been really an invaluable resource for me for baseball and honestly, like all other things. And then I think what's been amazing is that's actually where how I kind of found a community of people as far as, other folks that I've gotten to know personally, face to face over the years through Net 54, which I think the funniest story for me on that was, you know, I was, I love, I'm a guy that just loves relationships and people. And so, if I'm going to dive into something, one of the first things that I want to do is figure out a way to build relationships, uh, in the hobby. And so I had seen that there was this guy, I don't know if you've ever heard the name Rich Klein, but Rich is kind of a legend in cards, just in general. He works for ComC and he's an amazing guy. But I saw on his profile on Net 54 that he was in the Plano area, which is a hop, skip, and a jump where I am in Dallas. And so I had pinged him, and then we grabbed coffee and it was awesome. And he had mentioned Dr. Beckett, if Beckett as well. And so, anyways, Rich ended up connecting me with Dr. Beckett, and I went to Dr. Beckett's house and record a podcast together. I didn't. This is a month or two in the hobby for me, so I felt very unworthy of the invite from Rich and Dr. Beckett. They're so gracious to draw me into their community, and it turns out Dr. Beckett and I lived about a mile from each other, which is also pretty funny. But yeah, I was so grateful for just some of those amazing connections within the hobby. And then, on like Net 54 and other things, there's like they do a Secret Santa or other things like that have just been really, really meaningful through the years. So it's been really fun to connect with some amazing, like-minded folks as far as cards go, like yourself, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. I'm active in the Golf Cards and Memorabilia group, and we've got a couple thousand members, and I'm very active on Instagram. I don't post nearly as much as I should because I've got a bunch of cards that I, for some reason, choose to keep private. But
Yeah.
I guess if I get a nice card and I don't want to post it, it actually maybe it just means that card means more to me. Like I don't feel the need to show it off. And then sometimes when I show off a card, I realize afterwards I was really just looking for some gratification externally, and so maybe that's not the card for me. But that podcast with Dr. Beckett, so you actually were a guest on his podcast or with him? That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I felt very inadequate. But yeah, it's funny because I actually speaking of tracks, so I've actually known his his stepdaughter for a long time. I just didn't, she didn't have the last name Beckett, so I didn't put two and two together. So yeah, so we ran track together, and so we made the connection there. And he was like, "Well, yeah, just come on over." And then we'll sort some cards and talk about your journey. And anyways, so yeah, Dr. Beckett was so great, such a gracious host, and it was so fun to get to hear from him. And I had really, honestly, it's funny. I really had no idea what I was walking into. I didn't really understand kind of his gargantuan status in the hobby until, we did a few podcasts on, a few different subjects. And then as I'm looking into it, I thought, man, he's done a lot in the card world, and that's he's a lot bigger of a deal than I thought. So
No, he
I was
certainly
it
is.
it definitely definitely humbled me, and I was yeah. So shout out to Dr. Beckett for just being a really great host.
Where would people find that episode? Like, I would like to check it out.
Yeah, so we ended up doing three podcasts. I think one of them was on kind of my T206 collecting background on baseball cards, and then we did another on collecting on a budget, and then another on Net 54 Secret Santa. And so Dr. Beckett does a podcast called I think it's like in sports card insights with Dr. James Beckett. So if you look on Spotify or YouTube and I think iTunes, you could find or Apple Music now, you can find it. So yeah.
Cool. Right on. I look forward to checking that one out. That's funny you say, you felt inadequate. You felt like you weren't worthy. And I can kind of relate to that because my first podcasting experience was a guy, Paul Hickey on the Sports Card Strategy Show, and he knew how enthusiastic I was about golf cards, but that I wasn't necessarily experienced talking or whatever. But he had me on, and I just enjoyed talking. It was the enthusiasm and the authenticity comes across, and I can certainly tell that. With you right now, like you could definitely start your own podcast and be the running card community builder. Um, I talked about the Facebook group, Instagram, but there are niche communities on Reddit, on Discord, on dedicated hobby websites. So I definitely encourage people to go, look for the one that fits them best. I'm going to shift over to grading because you mentioned the Dallas Card Show is coming up pretty soon. By the way, I'm jealous. We don't have a great show like that.
Come on to Dallas, brother.
Uh,
You've got a free place to stay anytime you want.
well, I
So
appreciate that,
be
but
fun.
it's tricky to get away with the little ones. I know a lot of listeners out there might be able to travel a bit more, but yeah, it's tricky with our family. But so someday, once the kids are a bit older, a little more independent. But anyways, you mentioned grading, so you've got a bit of an eclectic grading habit. It looks like because you were showing off some cards. I don't know if we mentioned it verbally, but I saw them on the screen that were in PSA slabs. You mentioned you were going to get some of your cards graded with SGC, which makes sense because they're pre-war vintage. And then you mentioned one of your cards you were thinking about dropping off with Beckett. So can you walk us through, why are you open to all of these different companies? Do you have a preference? I mean, I have, my own personal insights and I know which is good for what and what the grading criteria are and that sort of stuff. But I'm just curious what your take is on all those grading companies.
Yeah, it's funny because it sounds like I'm all over the place, which is funny in my mind. I'm, pretty locked in, but no, so yeah, on paper, just hearing what I said, I get the confusion there, but yeah, for me, you know, I admire, I admire the big three. I guess you big four, include CSG in there. But for me, I've from aesthetics, I've always been drawn to SGC, and so I love they're great turnarounds, pretty very reasonably priced, and have always graded pretty much right on par with what I've been. Hey, this card's probably going to be a 3 or 4. Yeah, it's going to come back as a 3 or 4. And so it's great because of the Dallas show. I can just drop SGC always does submissions and I can drop them off in person. So I know the cards are safe, at least getting to SGC. And then, it's 10 days and I get the cards back. So it's an absolute slam dunk for me. Save $15 in shipping one of the ways. And so I like to usually I'll go SGC for most of my card submissions. I started a few, different set runs like on baseball. I'm working on the 56 tops Hall of Fame run. And so one of my criteria is to, have those all in a uniform SGC slab. So a few other brands have snuck in just from, a few people, I've gotten a couple cards given to me. It's like, hey, like, I don't really have a whole lot of desire to go cross that over because I'm grateful just to own the card. So yeah, and then I think as far as like I don't mind when it's more obscure things like a especially on the running cards, like I don't mind PSA slabs at all. I don't, I would enjoy them being all uniform, but to me, having the card is more than the grading company. So I've got PSA, SGC, Beckett. I think there's a CSG hiding in there that was given to me as well. So on the Beckett thing, I don't think SGC does autograph authentication. Don't do that anymore. So I was trying to think through my options. I'm not against using PSA. I forget whether they're at the Dallas show or not, but I know that Beckett is because they're here local in Dallas. So main criteria on autographs is I want to make sure that that is authentic, and I like encapsulation as well. So that seemed like a pretty easy win for me to go Beckett on that autograph.
Nice. Your options really are companies that are really well respected in the hobby. You're looking at Beckett or PSA, and PSA is partnered with JSA. So that kind of makes sense, and it's good to know that SGC sort of has a special place in your collection because of the aesthetics. Another aspect that I choose different companies over another is how each of them grades. So basically, the details of their grading criteria, or literally which cards they're willing to grade. So, for example,
Right.
I've got this Steph Curry Ice Prism card. You can see a little sticker there from PSA basically saying they wouldn't grade it because it was a factory error card. It's because on the back, it's my favorite basketball player, Steve Nash. So Steph Curry and Steve Nash are my two favorite players. They just happen to accidentally get printed on a single card. And I wanted it encapsulated for all the same reasons you already shared. And I know that I've seen this card in Beckett slabs multiple times. That would be a reason why I'm okay not having consistency, even though PSA is normally what most of my cards are in. I want this card in a Beckett slab. Another example on the grading scale side of things, like I've got speaking of our Pokemon collections, there's a first edition Lugia from
Oh
Neo
wow.
Genesis, and I had this graded by PSA. It's in phenomenal condition. Corners, edges, centering, everything's great. There on the foil, there is like I don't know if scratch is the right word, but like basically like maybe a print line kind of thing. And PSA gave it a PSA 7. And I was devastated because to me, this should easily be a PSA 9. Like you can't even see the scratch when you look at the card and then you look in the light and you reflect it. PSA just says, well, based on that kind of surface defect, it matches our PSA 7 scale. Whereas I've seen cards exactly like this with Beckett grade an 8.5 or 9 because the centering, the edges, the corners all bring the weighted grade up. So that's another example of how I might want to go with Beckett. And I actually have a Beckett grading pile because
Oh wow.
I've never
Okay.
submitted to them, but I've got half a dozen cards. Those are just two examples where I'm okay having a Beckett slab because, there's sort of a purpose behind grading with them. And then SGC, I used to be a big fan of them just because fast turnover time, good customer service, all that sort of stuff. They were available when PSA shut down. So they have a little special place in my collection as well. And I'm okay with everything being a little mismatched.
Shout out to Steve Nash. I love that. Steve was he was a Dallas Maverick for a short span and kind of right there in the heart of my childhood as a teenager. So Steve Nash is one of my guys as well.
Awesome. All right, moving on from grading, you mentioned to me privately that you were a closet golf collector. So what can you describe what that means and what intrigues you about golf card niche?
Yeah, so I probably am, yeah, as a closet golf collector, I'm probably the least knowledgeable golf golf history fan, as well as probably the worst golfer you're ever going to have on your podcast as well. But I love the game, and I'm fascinated by it, and I think it has such a rich history that frankly I haven't explored enough of. But even just hearing some amazing episodes with you and John Morton talking about Allen Robertson, or some of those amazing, older vintage guys. I mean, that gets me excited just being able to learn from you guys on some of that history. And then from cards, there's just such a, for me, an untapped realm of cards that just get me excited to learn about, to understand. And so I've started to try to educate myself on the cards. And so that's been a really fun journey. And there's a few sets and things that jump out at me, and it's definitely, I feel like I've got a whole swath of different projects and other things, but there's definitely a few golf card projects that I want to add into the fold as I'm, going to shows or looking on eBay or other things like that.
Cool, cool. You were actually the one who joined the mailbag a month or two ago, asking about 1924 WD and HO Wills golf course
That's right.
set,
Yeah.
depicting the actual scenery of a golf course as opposed to focusing in on a golfer. And that was really cool. And I didn't know anything about it until you mentioned it to me. So thanks for pointing me in that direction. And I had a really nice conversation with John Morton, learning about that set, kind of drawing parallels because I'm a little bit more of a modern collector to like the Formula One racetrack cards, which don't feature a particular athlete. Um, so that's a really cool set. If you have any insights on that, feel free to share. But I'm also curious if you've picked up any other golf cards, perhaps ones that actually do feature players, and what kind of other cards have kind of caught your attention.
Yeah, so it's funny because my introduction to golf cards, I forgot to mention this earlier, was not, I was actually wanting to do a favor for a friend he's a big golf guy. And so I thought, what could I give my buddy that's having a newborn, son, his first son? And I thought, man, I should get him a vintage golf card. And so I ended up, giving him this hilarious 1930 Will's Golfers card of Alexander Hurd. He's like, I don't know if you know the card, but it shows his like golf club in motion, and it's talking about his waggles. And I thought it was hilarious. And so I the first time I saw it, I just started laughing out loud, and I was like, this is the card that I'm going to give my buddy because this is hilarious. And that led me into thinking, oh, what other sets are there? And that's where I found that HO and Will's set of the golf courses. And I just love, it's a really simple set, like John talked about. Really appreciate you guys taking the time to unpack that. It was really, really helpful to me. But yeah, I love the simplicity of the set. And so it's definitely one that, I want to chase after. It does, technically fit into the Chariots of Fire set with the St. Andrews card that's in
Mm.
there. So there's some crossover, which is really fun. I'm probably the only guy in your channel that will talk about St. Andrews as it relates to running more than it does to golf. But no, it's fun to have that card for both its golf and Chariots of Fire history. So I'll definitely be chasing that. And then yeah, I think I want to learn more. I love hearing about you guys talk about, the 19, I think is it 1900 Copes? Is that the year?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
those are, I mean, I feel like that has a lot of similarities with, baseball's T206 set is kind of like the major set that influences a lot of collecting. And so that would be fun to pick up a few cards from that. But I definitely have added the that 1924 set on H1 Will set onto kind of my list as far as, I want to be intentional about it. If I see something at a show or something else, I want to grab that. I don't want to just go out and it's not an expensive set, but I want to be intentional on those purchases.
Yeah, I think the episode was called Vintage Golf Sets to Casually Collect with John Morton back on September 20th. And as you said, the cards aren't that expensive. So it's a nice place for collectors to dabble their toes into the golf world. And that's super cool. I never made that connection that, the Chariots of Fire, which drives a lot of your collecting, uh, is connected to that set because of St. Andrews.
Absolutely.
So, that's really cool. Kudos on finding a way to connect running and golf and cards. I would say my day is made. Those are all the things
Yeah,
the hobbies I love.
it's really special because I think as the more I've looked into golf cards, the more I find there's so much crossover with, I've had different running cards on my list, for a while, and it turns out there's golf cards in that set. So, I can think of three or four, like, for instance, those big Chariots of Fire cards from the 1924 Gallagher's, they have golf cards in that set. Or, there was several 1936 Turf cigarette cards that I wanted, and they actually have a really awesome, they have three or four golf cards in that set. It's a 50 card set, but they've got one that talks about the longest drive at the time. I forgot who the golfer was, but a $2 card, but it's just a fun pickup where, those worlds collide. So it's really, the more I look into it, the more crossover there is.
Yeah. What was the longest drive? Was it like 275 yards or something? Like,
Yeah, I want to say it was either two. I want to say it was 306 yards. I could be
wow.
wrong, but it might have been 275. I'll have to go back and look. I did end up selling that because I picked up an entire set and I sold it as a set. But yeah, and then I had a duplicate and gave it to one of my students that I mentor. That's a big golfer, so it was really fun. He had a great round, and I wanted to congratulate him. So I sent him a golf card from the 1920s, and he hadn't given me any feedback on it, but I hope he enjoyed it. So it was fun.
Awesome. No, it's very kind of you to share the hobby. I've got friends I like to give them cards just randomly, whether they're, completely low end cards or worth a few bucks, just because it at least draws some attention to our hobby, and it helps them feel intrigued or, interested, and it's always nice to be giving. Um, and I was going to ask you, what kind of sets golf cards apart from other sports as, baseball and a running collector, but I mean, we've drawn a lot of the parallels already, and it turns out that a lot of the golf cards and running cards come from the same multi-sport sets. So I feel like we've kind of covered that. But I think the golf course card that we're missing is Augusta National
Mm,
for the Masters, because of course, when they printed the 1924 Wells set, I don't think the Augusta had been built yet.
that would have been really fun card. Yeah, would have been all over that.
Speaking of which, I think you've been to the Masters, right?
I have. So yeah, I feel like most people on this channel would scoff and be like, "Oh man, Matt's been to the Masters and he's he shoot. I think my best golf round is probably a 115. But I did get to go. My wife's grandmother she's a huge golfer, and she's gotten to go for the last 40 years. She's been kind of, I guess it's grandfather. I don't know how it works, but she's grandfathered into tickets, and she's had tickets for so long. And so every year she gets four tickets for all the rounds. And so the very first year in 2017, when my wife and I got married, how epic is this? We get a Christmas present and we open it up and it's Masters tickets. And I was living in Atlanta at the time, and it's down the road. If, done work in Augusta, but never been. But, I love watching all the majors, faithfully watch pretty much all the majors all year round. And so it's super fun. So I do follow golf, do know my way around the players and everything else. But yeah, just being at the Masters was surreal. I mean, everything people say about it is absolutely true. I mean, coming from me, I probably didn't do it justice, but it was so fun to be able to walk the greens and just being there, and just amazing nature, and some amazing golf just was really, really meaningful. And my wife and I both left and we just said, man, that was really special. And so really fun to get to go to that. And yeah, we had an amazing time, and such a great memory.
Wow, that's amazing. Really hope you guys enjoyed that conversation with Matt Galvin. I really enjoy talking with somebody from such a niche hobby. I mean, we're all collecting cards here, but we end up siloed in these different categories. And even though I haven't really been a huge track and field or running card collector, it's a big part of my background, and I really enjoyed kind of sharing that
personal history with Matt. So I hope you guys enjoyed that first 20 or 30 minutes where we just kind of shared where we came from in sport. But more importantly, I don't identify as a Christian. However, it's something that's always intrigued me. And learning from not only Matt's take on the hobby and collecting because of his Christian background, but just in general, I love being around people of faith because it's something I'm drawn to, but it's also something I feel there's so many things to learn from people with such a background of integrity, and it's something I'm always hoping to incorporate more into my life. Whether or not it's something I subscribe to, I think there's lessons we can all learn. And on that note, I did have another conversation with Matt. We dove into his Christian background and what that means for cards more explicitly than just drawing parallels to the Chariots of Fire movie, for instance. So if you are interested in that, watch out for next week. And another spoiler, the following week, we've got another repeat guest coming back to the show to carry on the conversation of faith and the hobby, in particular, having a sense of accountability for stewardship in everything you do, including collecting. Thanks, guys. And it's Mike, the Golf Card Collector, Golf Cards and Memorabilia on Facebook, the Golf Card Collector on Instagram. I'll see you guys next week.
Ridiculous, Golf Card Collector.